All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be my video covering episodes 9 and 10, the finale of Michael Jordan's sports docuseries, The Last Dance. And, of course, those last two episodes cover the 96-97 season as well as the playoff run, and also the legendary 1998 NBA Eastern Conference Finals matchup against Reggie Miller and the Indiana Pacers. And in episode 10, we get the coverage of the 1998 NBA Finals, the rematch against Karl Malone and the Utah Jazz. So, of course, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Takeaway from the end of The Last Dance last night and what you heard.
Jenny, it made me even sicker than I was at the end of the 1998 season when I was there watching The Last Dance from the inside out as the columnist for the Chicago Tribune. I told Jenny and Shannon on Friday's show that I had made a video that we posted yesterday in which I suspected that Phil Jackson was the real villain of The Last Dance. He called...
Well, Phil Jackson was the master puppeteer. Everyone at the upper levels of this entire Bulls dynastic run was a high-level Kabbalist, including Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson is an extremely high-level Mason, i.e. a priest of Baal, and was able to manipulate Michael Jordan psychologically all the way until the end. Phil Jackson, as Skip Bayless is going to deduce and or evaluate, already knew that he had the LA Laker job where he would preside over Monarch assets, Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, all but locked up. Also, please notice that, as you can see here, Skip Bayless is wearing the Air Jordan shirt, which has the theme of black, white, and red. I have very little doubt that Skip does a very good job of acting as if he's not privy to certain understandings that he is privy to. Once again, there is a reason why he wears all black every Friday. It's for the Black Mass, also known as the quote-unquote Black Sabbath. He's a witch himself. That's why he's been allowed to maintain such a level of prominence in sports talk for pretty much the last 25 years.
Called it The Last Dance because it was his last dance, and it should not have been Michael Jeffrey Jordan's last dance.
Actually, yes, it should have. As a matter of fact, it should have to the fullest extent of that term, because Jordan should not have come back to play with the Wizards, but that was a part of his overall script as well. That was his last shaming ritual in order to earn the right to become an NBA owner.
Everybody in Chicago called Phil the Zen Master, but even late in the 98 season, I referred to him in print as the Spin Master.
Well, he was both.
And when I heard what Jenny just referred to at the end of the documentary last night, I fell out of my chair onto the floor. This was a bomb.
Why? Bad hip?
Bombshell. This did incriminate Phil Jackson as the real villain, not Jim.
No, it didn't incriminate Phil Jackson. All it did was really confirm that he was an associate or an accomplice to this entire storyline, because I don't consider it a crime. I think that Phil Jackson knew that this was the perfect way to wrap up this entire Jordan chapter in his life, and it was what was best for Michael, because at the end of the day, Phil Jackson pretty much has always known what was best for Michael, even more than Michael did. And had Michael Jordan stayed retired instead of coming back to play with the Wizards, there'd be no question that he's the greatest player of all time, because his proficiency and efficiency numbers would have been so vastly higher than everyone else's, especially in combination with his team's success. The conversation would have been moot. But coming back to play with the Wizards has lowered his overall numbers, his efficiency and proficiency numbers, to the level of just above a LeBron James. So Phil has always known what was best, not only for Michael, but also for himself.
Barry Krause, Phil Jackson. I had lengthy one-on-one interviews with both Phil and Jerry late in that season in Chicago. And I walked away from my interview with Phil not trusting him at all in this sort of Svengali hold, this way that he could hypnotize Michael Jordan and get...
Yes, because he was Michael Jordan's handler. Phil Jackson was Michael's handler. That's why Jerry Krause brought him on. But what happened was Jerry Krause started to get upset at the fact that Phil Jackson was siding with the person that he was supposed to be controlling, at least for the benefit of Jerry Krause. Jerry Krause started to notice that Phil Jackson was utilizing his manipulative tactics over Michael and Scotty for his own benefit and not for the benefit of the entire organization.
Get him to do what Phil wanted to do. So we heard the bombshell last night, never been reported, that Jerry Reinsdorf overruled Jerry Krause, his GM, went to Phil after that sixth and what became final championship and said, hey, Phil, I want you to come back. After Jerry Krause had opened the season by telling the media Phil could go 82-0 and he ain't coming back. The owner, thank you gods, came to his senses, overruled the GM and...
Right, but did Jerry Reinsdorf really, quote-unquote, come to his senses? Jerry Reinsdorf's plan was to bring back Michael Jordan with Phil Jackson and a new cast of characters. There's no way that Phil Jackson or Michael Jordan were going to agree to that. So it was pretty much the equivalent of a boxer acting as if he wants to fight another top-level challenger, but he prices himself out. That's the way that boxers, that's the mechanism that they use to get out of big fights. They price themselves out. Jerry Reinsdorf was trying to make the appearance of someone who wanted Phil and Michael back, but he really didn't, because he was not willing to continue to pay for older players. Plus, both he and Krause wanted to appear to be smarter than they actually were by rebuilding an entirely different championship nucleus. And I suspect that the only reason why they were willing to bring Michael back is because they knew that it would ensure a packed house. They knew that Michael wasn't going to come back with a whole different cast of players. Like, give me a break.
Said, Phil, you've got to come back. And Phil said, no, I'm done, Jerry Reinsdorf. I need some time away. So I told you, Shannon, on Friday that even though Phil kept saying all along that trail in the playoffs, Michael's had enough. He's burned out. His tank is empty. He needs to walk away now. When I asked Michael about that quote from Phil, I asked him this one-on-one. He rather coldly answered, that's Phil's opinion. And I thought, okay, good. Maybe that means you're going to come to your senses, Michael, and come back without...
Michael understood where his bread was buttered. He knew that if he wanted to win another championship or continue to win championships, that takes a formula. That's something that Skip Bayless refuses to accept because of his Michael Jordan idolatry, very similar to his Tom Brady idolatry. The difference is that Tom Brady has been able to take the formula from New England down to Tampa Bay, a team with an excessive amount of talent. Now, would Michael Jordan have been willing to take not only his talents, but his knowledge of basketball to another team that was very talented and teach them the triangle and things of that nature, defensive principles? I doubt that. Tom has a lot more sporting and coaching patience than Michael Jordan has ever or will ever have. So to think that Michael was just going to go somewhere else without Phil to play the 98-99 season, it was not in the cards. There were just too many reasons to retire at that time. And once again, he and Phil were psychologically linked. Phil as master, Michael as apprentice. In the same way, years later, Phil would be linked to Kobe Bean Bryant as master and apprentice.
Without Phil Jackson. So here's what I can't... This is, Shannon, for me, the complete and utter sad, sorry disconnect. Why didn't Michael ever have any dialogue with Jerry Reinsdorf after the season was over? He said...
Because Reinsdorf did not deal directly with Michael. They dealt through intermediaries. Either Michael's agent, David Falk, would talk to Reinsdorf, or Reinsdorf GM, Jerry Krause, would talk to either Michael or David Falk. Owners don't normally deal directly with players when it comes to negotiations. Skip Bayless, you know that shit already. And come on. And besides that, David Falk was in on it. He's another Kabbalist who has a certain level of manipulative control over Jordan.
Said last night at the end of The Last Dance, Michael Jordan said, we had no dialogue. Why did he fall for Phil Jackson's spin master ploy that let's have a grieving ritual? Let's all come together at the end as a team.
Because he bought into everything else. At that point, Phil Jackson was the key to everything that Michael sought after when it came to winning. So he embraced the spiritual component of what Phil Jackson was teaching because it proved to be successful. It proved to work.
And let's all write down our thoughts about how much we loved each other. Michael even wrote, they said, a poem. Let's read it to each other in a circle, and then let's throw it into a trash can and light it on fire and burn it so we can all breathe it and let it go. What are you talking about? Let what go? I'm convinced.
Well, Skip Bayless, everyone is not as pragmatic as you. Some people prefer theater. Phil Jackson is someone who loves theatrics. It's just who he is. He's part actor.
Phil Jackson already had some kind of handshake deal with the Lakers.
Agreed. Totally agreed. With Jerry Bustine. And that is his real name, Bustine. He just goes by Jerry Bust to take away the Jewishness.
There was already Shaq and very young Kobe, and Phil took 1 year off, and then suddenly he was back in business, back right in the saddle, coaching.
And that was the perfect spot for Phil. To go from being a Bull to being a Laker, i.e. a Phoenician, a great mariner, a master sage over his apprentices, Shaq and Kobe, knowing who both of them were, chosen ones, quote unquote.
Shaq and Kobe to 3 straight championships in Los Angeles, while Michael Jordan sat out the final 3 years of his prime, ages 35, 36, and 37.
Michael had maxed out his potential in Phil's eyes. Where else were they going to go? 6 is a number that has a high level of resonance and relevance in Kabbalistic or Luciferian circles. In the esoteric understanding, it's the Great Spiral. The Fibonacci spiral, per se. One of the secrets to the grand architecture of life. The divine spiral of DNA. It also represents, once again, the earthly man.
Why, Michael, didn't you wake up and go to Reinsdorf and say, you know, the truth is we don't need Phil. We saw it again and again in this documentary. The motivator for this team, really the ultimate head coach of this team, wasn't Phil Jackson. It was Michael Jordan. So all that baloney about Krause having fallen in love with Tim Floyd at Iowa State, forget it. Why couldn't Michael have gone to Reinsdorf and said, hey, Jerry, let's go get a real coach, somebody with experience.
Like who? Who was Michael going to bring back at 35 years old, Skip Bayless? It was over. Sometimes you just have to accept that things come to an end. Everything ends in the flesh, dude. You just can't keep going and going and going like a damn Duracell battery. It was a wrap. And I know that it was difficult for Michael to accept because he was on top. The sports world is the only world where we tell people who are gifted above all others that it's over at 35. In every other aspect of life, whatever you're great at, you can do pretty much until you drop dead. But in sports, we tell all-time great athletes, even if they're on top, at 35, you should sit your ass down.
Let's go back to Doug Collins. That was his coach, obviously, for 3 years pre-Phil Jackson.
Hell no. That's like going back to some girlfriend that you used to mess with 10 years ago who had a big mouth. You have to be desperate to do some dumb shit like that.
And obviously, Michael ended up taking Doug Collins with him to Washington in the end. Why not do that? And so Michael is saying, it's maddening we didn't get a chance to run it back. Well, it's maddening because you didn't seize the opportunity to say, this Phil Jackson stuff's a bunch of phony baloney, a bunch of hocus pocus.
Because he didn't want to believe it. Just extending the metaphor out. If Doug Collins is the girl from 10 years ago who was an okay girlfriend who had a lot of flaws, Phil Jackson was like the perfect wife. And it's very difficult for dudes who have a quote-unquote perfect wife or a good woman to believe that she has any flaws, even if it's very obvious that the flaw that she does have is so gross in nature, meaning so exceedingly great in nature, that it's almost preposterous to believe that that's the case. And that's something that Jordan clearly had a hard time understanding. The correlation or the connection between Phil Jackson speaking with a forked tongue, and the fact that Michael Jordan was being made to believe that the reason why the team was being broken up were the two Jerrys. He couldn't accept the fact that Phil Jackson had tricked him and gotten over on him.
But no, he had some weird kind of hold, and Michael talked about it at the end. He could get you to believe just anything. He could pull you into just about anything when it would involve the team.
Yes, it's called mind control, Skip Bayless. That's the hold that he had over Michael Jordan.
Well, why? That team, as Michael said, would have all come back if Michael said, I'm coming back.
I doubt it. Scottie Pippen was not going to come back to the Bulls. He was off to get his money. And I believe that even many of the other role players, they were about done with Michael. You know, they were tired of getting their ass whipped in practice, both on the court and physically. I think that they were good. They were done. Luke Longley wanted his money. Scottie wanted his money. I think that Dennis would have come back. Maybe Kerr and Bushler, maybe. But a lot of those guys, they were just done with the whole experience.
I believe Scottie, everybody would have come back on one-year deals. That team was not too old. The Knicks won the East the next year without Patrick Ewing. My Spurs won the shortened season. It was a lockout season championship, and that was pre-Tony Parker, pre-Manu, pre-obviously Kawhi Leonard.
That team was thirsty, though. They would have given that Bulls team a great run because that Bulls team would have been way older. It would have been a 37 or 38-year-old Rodman going against Tim Duncan. It would have been a 36-year-old Jordan. I mean, the Spurs didn't have any threats in the backcourt, really. That era was so defensive, though. I think they had Jaren Jackson and Avery, what's this guy's name? Avery something in the backcourt. Avery Johnson in the backcourt. So Jordan would have had his way to a degree. But keep in mind, he would have been coming off of a surgery on his right index finger. So he would have been compromised as a player.
They would have won again. I think they would have won 2 championships. And in the end, it left me sickened and saddened that Michael's own documentary actually unwittingly exposed Michael as being naive to this whole situation, Shannon.
Good point. The documentary was so raw and hard-hitting, it even hit Jordan. It hit the subject of the damn documentary, right square in the jaw.
And he got spun by the spin master and spun right out of town into retirement.
Skip, I can understand why you and others that were so infatuated with the Bulls, and although you covered, you have a soft spot in your heart for Michael Jordan and the Bulls. But I don't believe one word that Jerry Reinsdorf said. You know why? Because this is the New England Patriots situation. If Coach Belichick and Mr. Kraft had wanted Tom Brady back, why did you sign him? Why did you only give him $8 million? Why not give him an extension of 2 to 3 years? When you took your butt to Montana and you talked to Phil and said, Phil, come back for 1 year, why did you only offer him a 1-year deal?
Maybe he offered more than 1 year and Phil said, you know what, this is going to be my last year. Once again, they're operating according to certain scripts, narratives, and Kabbalistic rituals involving gematria. It's just the case. It's just the fact of the matter. So you're talking about 2 wizards, 2 sages deliberating with one another, understanding certain astronomical and astrological situations, scenarios, and significances. That's the most important thing. That's why Reinsdorf flew out there to meet up with Phil Jackson on, I believe it was July 20th or July 23rd. It was around the time of the Heliacal Rising.
You really wanted him back. Why not give him a 2?
Jordan's father, by the way, was also killed, I believe, on July 23rd.
Why not give him a 3-year deal? Skip, Phil Jackson knew he was not sticking around for a rebuild. Jerry Krause also said, Steve Kerr, Ron Harper, and others, their market value wasn't worth that to us. He was not bringing them back, and they were not coming back on a 1-year deal. That's very convenient for Michael Jordan to say, yeah, they'd come back on a 1-year deal. That's easy for you to say because you're making $36 million on a 1-year deal. You're
Agreed.
making $40 million a year from Nike on that 1-year deal. But hold on, what about these other guys? Scottie Pippen had been vastly underpaid for the last 6 years. Scottie Pippen was not coming back on a 1-year deal. Scottie Pippen had been
I agree. Even if they would have offered him $20+ million a year, he was not going to come back there on a 1-year deal. The bitterness was too great between him or between he and the front office.
Paid for such a long time, Scotty needed to get paid. At that point in time, Skip, once you win 1, 2, 3 rings, what's the fourth one? There are only 2 people. Another ring would have really helped. And it would only help one guy, Scottie Pippen, if he won Finals MVP. Everybody else did nothing to gain. Was that going to get Steve Kerr in the Hall of Fame? Is that the reason why Steve Kerr got a head coaching job?
Well, the reason why Steve Kerr got a head coaching job was his association with Michael Jordan. But to your point, the difference between a 3P and a 4P for someone like Steve Kerr is negligible.
Ron Harper, Tony Kukoc, Luke Longley, was any of those guys going to get in the Hall of Fame if they got a 4th ring? Absolutely not. So therefore, at that point in time, and we see it a lot with football players, after I win 1 or 2 rings, there's no sense in me standing around for a 3rd. Let me go get that big payday, secure my family for perpetuity, and make generations well off. So
for perpetuity.
So Skip, for me, Jerry Reinsdorf, that's very convenient because he knew Phil Jackson was not going to come part of a rebuild. And Jackie Mack said in the first series, she noticed Tim Floyd hanging around 96, 97. What the hell is another coach hanging around your team for in 96 and 97, Skip?
For the same reason why Phil Jackson was hanging around in 86 and 87 and 88. Because Jerry Krause had planned for Phil Jackson to take over the job about 3 years before he actually did. It's the same thing with Tim Floyd. Hey, it's like a relationship. Your chick already knows the guy that she's willing to leave you for. She's been talking to him for months, maybe a year and a half. You just don't know about it. Same thing with these general managers. They know who they're going to replace their current coach with because they're either talking to or grooming him for 2 years in advance, just in case things don't work out with his current coach.
This was Jerry Reinsdorf knows how this comes off. For 20 years, Skip, before this documentary came out, everybody painted Jerry Krause as the villain. Jerry Krause broke it up. Jerry Krause broke it up. But as we started delving into it and got a little deeper, we realized Jerry Krause didn't own the team. Jerry Krause did Jerry Reinsdorf bidding for him. Jerry Reinsdorf, when he went to Montana and signed Phil Jackson for that 1-year deal, he could say, Phil, we're going to keep this thing together for at the bare minimum 2 years. 2 years. That's what we're going to do. But he didn't do that. He let Jerry Krause all year long. He could go 82-0. This thing is not coming back. Not one time did Jerry Krause say, hold on, wait a minute now. We haven't made the final decision. Why would he even allow Jerry Krause to say that? He could have said, look, we're going to reevaluate this thing after the season. This is a big season for us. It'll be the second of our 3-peats, and everybody's going to be, I'm sure, going to be exhausted. But we'll cross that bridge once we get to it. Jerry Reinsdorf never once in the entire 98 season said, hold on, guys, wait a minute. We're going to see how this thing plays out, and then we'll circle back and get back to you at a later date in time. Skip, he was not going to re-sign Scotty. Scotty was not going to sign a 1-year deal after being 5 years underpaid. And Skip, that's the same thing what we're seeing with Dak. $33 million is a lot of money.
Of course, this interview took place before Dak Prescott got his leg cracked in half when he was basically pulled backwards and had his ankles snapped in half in 2 different places.
For 1 year, no question. But Dak says, I want 4 years. I want 5 years. So why would I accept a 1-year deal when I need a 4 or 5-year deal? And so that's what you're asking these guys to do. Give up market value, 3, 4-year deal to take a 1-year deal for another.
Yeah, there's no way that Scottie Pippen was coming back. Definitely not to sign a 1-year deal. That 1-year deal would have had to have been something that Jordan would have gotten. Like Jordan would have had to come to Scottie and said, okay, you take the $35 million, I'll take $20 million just for 1 year. For that to be worth Scottie's while.
Another ring is not going to change my life, but $5, $6, $7 million a year compared to a $3 million.
But knowing Jordan loved to play and win so much, he probably would have done that. If Pippen would have came to Jordan and said, okay, I'll come back, but I get the $35 million cut and you get the $20 million cut, Jordan would have said, you know what? All right, cool.
Nah, Skip. So I do not believe a word Jerry Reinsdorf is saying. I believe, Skip, this is wishful thinking. I think he's having buyer's remorse. I guess you can't have seller's remorse. he sold something, Skip, that he wants now. No, bro. And realizing, Skip, Jerry Krause did convince him, oh, I can rebuild this thing. Oh, it's
Well, keep in mind, Jerry Krause is also the same person who found himself in a conundrum in the early 2000s, because even though he started to draft relatively good players like Jason Williams and Ron Artest, a lot of those players were mentally weak. They were mentally soft. So there were some issues there. Jerry Krause, you know, he was a great general manager, but his life was also scripted to a degree as well. I believe that he was ritualistically removed in 2017 at the age of 77 on the spring equinox.
Because remember, it was organizations. Organizations win titles, not players. It's organizations. And he convinced Jerry Reinsdorf, Jerry Krause, the general manager, I can rebuild this thing. And guess what? They've been picking in the lottery ever since. So I do not believe Jerry Reinsdorf.
Well, they had a little bit of a spark back in, I think, like 2011 with Derrick Rose, but I think by that time, Jerry Krause was gone. I think it was Gar Forman and John Paxson.
I do not believe they were bringing this thing back, because they could have nipped that in the bud by giving him a 2 or 3 year extension when he took his butt to Montana to begin with.
There's nothing not to believe, Shannon. He said it, and Phil corroborated it last night in the documentary. We know that Jerry Reinsdorf said, I came to my senses after they won 6 in a row, because as he said in episode 1, Jerry Reinsdorf...
Right, but what kind of sense did he come to? The kind of sense that says re-sign Phil and Michael and they're bringing a whole new different cast of characters? That's not real. That's just him once again trying to play the good cop.
He had let Krause convince him this team was too old. It was hitting the wall.
They were hitting the wall. That 1998 series against the Pacers was an example of them hitting the wall.
So Jerry Reinsdorf went into the last year with Phil Jackson on a 1 year.
That Pacer team, if they defeat the Bulls, they're going to beat Utah also.
Because he did not think they could go win a 6th championship and 3rd in a row. And as he said last night, and by the way, I was shocked in the beginning with episode 1 that Jerry Reinsdorf even...
But you know what? That series may have gone 7 games. I would have to think about that. Mark Jackson against Stockton, Reggie Miller against Hornacek, Karl Malone. You would expect him to be dominant against the Davis boys, even though that would have been very physical. Rick Smits, he would have the advantage over Ostertag. I would have to think about that. The Pacers would have the better bench. You'd probably have Jalen Rose against Shannon Anderson. You'd have Howard Isley against Travis Best. That would have been a great matchup. Very evenly matched.
Been sat down for this documentary. But the reason he did, he wanted to exonerate himself, and in turn, the late Jerry Krause, who obviously couldn't defend himself, he's no longer with us, God rest his soul. But the point was he wanted to take both Jerrys off the hook, because he did come to his senses. He did call Phil right after the 6th championship was won and say, hey, I didn't see this coming. Let's do it again next year. I offer you a 1-year deal. And he...
Right, but Reinsdorf never said that. What Reinsdorf said is that he wanted to bring back Phil and Michael and bring back a whole different cast of players. He was not going to bring back Scottie Pippen and Steve Kerr and Ron Harper and those guys and Dennis Rodman. He really just wanted to use Jordan as a showcase, as a monkey in the circus with Phil Jackson there, and maybe they could prep the new generation of players and sneak in one last championship for Michael. I mean, and that's the best case scenario. But he wasn't sincere about bringing back the team. I mean, give me a break.
He was prepared to offer everybody else at least a 1-year deal. I believe they could have paid Scottie Pippen because they could have mixed and matched all kinds of spare parts on a team that was top-heavy as bleep, as LeBron once said of his Cavaliers. It was not a deep basketball team.
Thank you, sir. So many people try to claim that the Chicago Bulls of the late 90s were this super team. They were not. They were a team of cast-offs.
All those Steve Kerrs and Will Perdue's and Joe Klein's and Judd Buechler's, you could mix and match any or all of those.
Absolutely.
And by the way, they did have a chance. They did woo Tracy McGrady, who was then a young player, like in his third year, and was a free agent. In dire...
No, I think that Skip has his years mixed up. Tracy's rookie year was that Last Dance year, the 97-98 season. And actually, they were considering trading Scottie for the rights to Tracy McGrady in that 97 offseason after they beat Utah the first time.
Need, you could have probably signed Tracy McGrady if, in fact, Michael had stayed. But Phil told Reinsdorf, I don't want to rebuild, because he knew he had already talked Michael into walking into the sunset with him. That's all you need to know. They were going to have no chance. There's no way Scottie or Ron Harper or Rodman are going to come back with no Jordan. But if Jordan says yes...
Those guys were not going to come back anyway, Skip Bayless. Reinsdorf only wanted Phil and Jordan back. That's it.
Yes, I'll come back because I like the next coach. It doesn't have to be Phil. It could have been, as I said, Doug Collins. Could have been any made man in the NBA who'd want to come coach them one more time. I think they could have won 2 more in a row to make it 5 in a row.
Let me say this also, since this video is supposed to be covering episodes 9 and 10, and basically this is just Skip Bayless bitching and complaining about what he believes to be Phil Jackson's chicanery against Michael Jordan. And yes, he did utilize some machinations, but that's to be expected. But what I didn't like about episodes 9 and 10, especially episode 9, is that they spent way too much time on Steve Kerr. I did not need to see a 7-minute portion in episode 9 about Steve Kerr, but I understand why they did it. It's because outside of Michael Jordan, he's the most well-known member to this day of that Chicago Bulls three-peat, strangely enough, but maybe that was a part of the script the whole time. So they gave him his shine, and they also validated his wokeness to a degree. But they didn't need to have a 7-minute segment about Steve Kerr. I also don't like the fact that they omitted games 5 and 6 in the Pacers series, because both those games were very eventful. I also don't like that they omitted arguably one of the most classic moments of the NBA Finals, when Scottie Pippen tells Karl Malone in the latter portion of Game 1 of the 97 Finals, the mailman does not deliver on Sunday. And of course, Karl Malone misses 2 free throws. Jordan comes down and hits a game-winning shot. That should have been in that episode. Episode 10 was pretty good as well. It's just at the end, I thought, got a little dry. They should have shown more of the post-game celebration after Game 6, because after all, it was about the 98 title run. But I understand why they included that interview with Jordan and him asking about what Reinsdorf said and so on and so forth. But I mean, it's not much to nitpick. Once again, my main criticism is that the episode should have been longer so that they could fit in more, because I think that it would have provided even more context. And as most of the people found out about Michael Jordan and that Bulls team, they had charisma to spare. It wouldn't have been like, oh my God, this episode is dragging on. You almost never get tired of watching that team or Michael Jordan, because it's just like the energy emanated from within them and from within him.
A row. But the point was, there's nothing not to believe, because Reinsdorf did offer, and Phil agreed last night on the documentary. Yes, he offered me a deal. They blew the whole Tim Floyd thing right out of the water, because he could have said, yes, I'll come back. But to do that, he would have had to swallow his crow. He hated Jerry Krause, and he wanted to stick it to Krause by being able to Svengali Michael Jordan right out of town.
Let me also say this. Even though they gave Dennis Rodman a hard time about the wrestling thing after Game 3, I think it was, Dennis was smart. He knew that he was not going to have a post-basketball career as a commentator or an analyst. He knew that, you know, for the most part, if he was going to be able to prolong his stay in the entertainment industry, it was going to be as a wrestler, because he does play that role as the divine clown. Similar to, you know, what a Rob Gronkowski plays today.
And leave them high and dry. And they were left high and dry. Tim Floyd had 3 straight terrible years and then got fired in the 4th year.
A lot of other people had some terrible years there, with the exception of Tim's, and then Tim's had run afoul with him. But Skip, hold on, wait a minute. The guy the strongest guy that had the strongest mind, the strongest mentality, got spun by Phil Jackson. So this...
Of course. And that's normal. Jordan was not one to trust many people. And it's not only the case that the one person that you do trust, if you're not someone who trusts people a lot, is the person who gets over on you.
This don't jive now.
Did.
Now, one or two things. Hey, no. Not a man that has that indomitable will. Not a man that has that shit. No. Now all of a sudden, somebody can run game on Michael Jordan. When I've heard you and everybody else say Michael Jordan has the strongest mind ever. He got spun by a guy that wasn't even on the court. Skip, my thing is that why would you allow... Skip.
I agree with Skip. Michael Jordan, proverbially speaking, was in love with Phil Jackson as a head coach. Like, he was in love with him because of the doors that Phil Jackson was able to open up to Michael when it came to success. Michael Jordan understood that his legacy was going to be directly aligned to his team's success because he'd already put up the individual numbers to be considered one of the greats ever. So as long as he continued to stockpile championships, his viability as the greatest, not only the greatest basketball player, but the greatest athlete ever, was going to escalate exponentially with every championship victory. So he owed that to Phil Jackson in his mind.
Why would you allow? Okay, you know you...
And as I always tell you, brothers, when you allow yourself to fall in love, that means that, you know, you're opening yourself up for manipulation.
You're going on this journey. Why would I wait until the middle of the trip to realize that I don't have a spare? Because that's what they did. They went all the way down the road, letting Jerry Krause say this is the end. Not one time did Jerry Reinsdorf says, hold on, wait a minute. They asked him. He didn't say during the season. At no point in time during the season did I listen to ever hear, and I remember it because I was old enough to remember it. I was 30. Did I hear Jerry Reinsdorf says, oh, hold on, wait a minute, guys. This is a bit premature. We'll see how this thing plays out, and then we'll go from there. All he did was he perpetuated. No, Skip. No. Don't tell. Hold on.
He was waiting to see if they won or not. He was shocked they won a 6th championship.
I'm not quite sure if he was shocked, but I do agree he was waiting to see if they were going to fulfill what was already in the script. That's what he was waiting for, because either way, they were going to break that team up. If they lost in the conference finals or the finals, that would have been the perfect excuse to obliterate the team. If they win, then you have to spin it into this is the perfect time to end it on a high note.
Same thing with Mr. Kraft. Had they wanted Tom Brady would still be in New England, because instead of just giving him $8 million on last year's contract, they would have gave him a 2-year extension. That's not what they did. Now, after the...
Hey, Shannon gets so angry. All he got to do is talk about Michael Jordan. He gets so tight. This nigga got 15 LeBron James jerseys. Hey, yo, who the hell need that many LeBron James jerseys, man? This shit is ridiculous. Oh, shit. He got one jersey for the morning, one jersey for the afternoon, one jersey for night, one jersey to work out in. Like, come on, brother.
Fact. Now when Tom Brady is about to leave, we want you, Tom. Once they realized that Phil Jackson was going to walk out the door and take Michael with him, now we want you. Phil said, no, I'm out. Plus, he also said, Skip, he said, I thought that would be very, very unfair to Jerry Krause, because, Skip, they sincerely and genuinely disliked each other.
Agreed. Phil Jackson was done. He was ready to go. I mean, in more ways than one. He was just finished.
Because both guys wanted credit. Maybe, like you said, maybe Michael deserved all the credit. But you have to give Phil some credit, because before Phil got there, that team wasn't winning squat juice.
Phil deserves a hell of a lot of credit.
So we can say, well, Doug Collins might have got him over the hump, but he didn't. Phil Jackson got them over the hump.
Doug Collins was not the guy to get you over any hump. Doug Collins was bugged out. He was knowledgeable, but he was bugged out.
Just like the same thing with Shaq and Kobe. You could say, well, anybody didn't do it.
Agreed.
Because Shaq and Kobe had other coaches before Phil, and none of them got it done. Phil got it done. So give Phil his due. No matter how important of a role you thought he played, He played a significant role, and he got it done. Jerry Reinsdorf, all of a sudden, I went to Phil. You should have went to, you had Phil in Montana. Why not give him a 2-year extension? Hold on. What you mean you didn't believe it? You got Michael Jordan.
Jerry Krause.
Go ahead.
Jerry Krause had convinced Jerry Reinsdorf, we're too old, we're hitting the wall. And then Jerry Reinsdorf realized, my GM misled me. He screwed.
Bullshit, Skip Bayless. The reason why Reinsdorf flew out there to meet with Phil Jackson was to convene with him. They most likely had a ritual of some sort. And Reinsdorf was able to convince Phil Jackson that it was in the cards and it was in Phil's best interest to end, this stretch of his life and of the overall script on a high note, because it was going to work. As long as they put their best foot forward, the spell casting was going to be too strong for it not to work. And Phil agreed, Phil understood, and he went out there and he did his job. Jerry Krause, also a Kabbalist, for whatever reason he had issues with Phil. Most likely he thought maybe he could cast a spell strong enough with Tim Floyd. But it wasn't going to work.
Screwed up. He misread how old we are. All those players went on. Scotty played 7 more years. Steve Kerr played 5 more. Rodman played 2 more.
Yes, all those players played all those additional years, but they were nowhere near as prominent on those teams as they were on Chicago. Now, Steve Kerr did have that one game with San Antonio when he hit like 5 threes in the second half or some shit, but that basically was his last hurrah. I think that was in like 2003.
I'm sorry, Ron Harper won 2 more championships with the Lakers. All those guys could have played at least 2 more years. So let me ask you this question. What do you think would have happened if Michael had called Jerry Reinsdorf and said, hey, Jerry, please go get me another coach, somebody with NBA experience, maybe Doug?
That's kind of a hypothetical, because I just don't think that Michael Jordan was ever going to do that. That's kind of like someone saying, what if a kid calls up Child Protective Services and says, please get me a different father? Well, that's not anatomically or biologically possible. At that point in Michael Jordan's professional life, Phil Jackson was his basketball dad. Michael Jordan did not see a replacement for Phil Jackson. He made it very clear, no Phil Jackson, no him. So at no point was he going to call up Jerry Reinsdorf and recommend anything. As far as I know, he didn't even work through Reinsdorf. He tried to communicate with Krause, and Krause would shut him down. I mean, businesses back then in the sports world were not ran like how they're ran today. Every once in a while, you'd have an owner who would converse with a player, like a Jerry Buss with Magic. But for the most part, even if you were a star, the owner would tell you, go sit your ass down.
Collins, I don't know, maybe Greg Popovich, for that matter, who had not yet won a championship in San Antonio. Whoever he could have gotten, even elevating one of the assistants. I love Frank Hamlin. People don't know who he is. He was Phil's #1 assistant that year. Let's even elevate him into the head coaching chair, because it didn't matter who the head coach was, as long as it wasn't Tim Floyd from the Iowa State Cyclones. That's the one who wouldn't work for Michael Jordan. So my point is, what would have happened, Shannon? What if Michael had some, as he said, dialogue with Reinsdorf and said, just go get me another made man coach, just somebody with some NBA clout? What would have happened?
Well, Skip.
Wouldn't have happened, Skip Bayless. Michael Jordan was not willing to learn anything new when it came to his pursuit to win a championship. He already had the formula. He wasn't going to sit down at 35 years old and listen to some fledgling coach who he couldn't be sure actually had what it took to lead the team. That's how you know that when he played with the Wizards, there was never any intention on winning a championship. It was just a showcase ritual and a shaming ritual for himself to garner some favor with the other Kabbalists, in the NBA owners circle, so that he could justify owning a team. I'm sure that Robert Johnson had to demean and denigrate himself as well before he gained access to a team. But that's all that was about. That's why Jordan didn't care about what system they ran in Washington, because it wasn't for real in his mind. It was just him going out there, keeping the seat warm for LeBron, and trying to justify why he should own a team.
Skip, that's easy to say. That's been 2 decades ago. So it's really hard for me to say, honestly say what would have happened. But what I gathered is that Michael Jordan and Jerry Reinsdorf really never had any dialogue. The only dialogue that I saw that came through in the documentary, Skip, is that when Michael Jordan says he wants to play baseball, and because Jerry Reinsdorf owned the White Sox, that was a no-brainer for him. Other than that, Skip, I can't see a situation where I ever heard.
And Jerry Reinsdorf also understood that Michael Jordan was going to eventually come back. See, Reinsdorf is the angle that people are not really pursuing from the perspective that it needs to be pursued, or from the angle that it should be pursued. He is the ultimate puppet master here, even above Phil Jackson and above Jerry Krause. He's the ultimate puppet master because he's the only one who clearly has an understanding as to what Jordan's role was in the sports world.
Michael Jordan and the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf, really having dialogue. So at this juncture, Michael's like, why am I having dialogue with you now? And so I think that's how he left it, Skip, for me. That's what I gathered. I could be wrong. You were there, and there were others there. But I don't remember a situation in the documentary, this 10-part series, where they ever said Michael Jordan and Jerry had dialogue. I guess
at all, because Jerry Reinsdorf did not believe in that, conversing with players like that. He talked to agents. I mean, that's what he did. And that was only if the negotiations broke down with Krause, which they often did.
It came to contract, David Falk handled that in, and Jordan played basketball. But when it came for him to retire, and he says, I want to try my hand at baseball, well, the White Sox, because the owner of the Bulls owned the White Sox, so for me, it was a no-brainer. So I am not surprised that Michael Jordan didn't have dialogue with Jerry Reinsdorf, because he had never had dialogue, with the exception of that one occasion that I can deduce from everything that I saw last night.
Okay, and that is a good point, and I agree with that premise. They had no relationship before. So, and you brought up David Falk. Maybe it was up to David Falk to try to moderate the situation, try to be the referee here.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe he should have talked to Jerry Reinsdorf.
David Falk was also a handler for Jordan. I'm sure that if David Falk was to mediate any situation, once it was conveyed to him exactly what his role was going to be in juxtaposition to Reinsdorf, he would have stood down. Because once again, there's a lot going on here outside of regular NBA player negotiations.
What I expected last night, Shannon, I thought Michael would sit there and drop his head and say, you know, the truth was Phil was right. I was burned out. My tank was empty and I was done.
Hell no. Michael Jordan, as he's already stated, is a competition addict. The greatest compliment that Michael Jordan ever could have gotten in his career at the end would have been for him to be laid out on the floor with 2 torn Achilles and ruptured ACLs, or maybe I'm saying it wrong. Maybe it's 2 ruptured Achilles and 2 torn ACLs with absolutely nothing left in Game 7 of the NBA Finals, having lost. And then he could say, finally, I've, like a samurai, I've found a glorious death for myself. Like, that's how he views it. I don't think that he views his career as going 6 for 6 as the appropriate way to end a career. I think that he wanted to lose in the finals or leading up to the finals so that he could say, okay, this is the closure that I need to move on with my life.
I thought he would give in to the premise that it was the last dance, but that's not what we got. We got Michael Jeffrey Jordan saying we could have won 7. I think he believes they could have won 8. And for him to say that everybody would have come back, and then it's maddening for him to this day to think about it, is devastating for me. I'm his biggest fan.
Allegedly, you're his biggest fan, but you don't seem to know much about Jordan, Skip Bayless. That's the problem.
What's the basic premise of all sports, Shannon, is if you win a championship, you get to defend it. It's like the essence of competition.
That's the point. And that's what Jordan's so angry about. He wanted to get knocked out.
They got it jerked out from underneath them. They didn't get a chance to defend when Michael wanted to defend his title. at least one more time, and I believe all of them because I thought that was one of the, again, I told you it was.
Right, but we know how Jordan is as a gambler. When he says just one more, what he really means is keep going until I can't go anymore. So with Jordan, it would have been 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then 10, and let's just keep going and going and going and going. And I think that those guys were burnt out of him.
It was the greatest defensive team. It was a juggernaut, and if they'd won a couple of more, you could have started making the case they were the greatest dynasty in the history of sports. So that.
Well, many people already make that case, Skip Bayless, that they were the greatest dynasty in the history of sports, the Chicago Bulls in the 90s. You have to rank them above the 80s 49ers. You have to rank them above the 70s Steelers. You'd have to rank them above the 90s Cowboys and the 90s Yankees because of the level of success, continued success, without a defeat in the championship round.
That's why it tears my guts.
Some people might say, well, what about the Bill Russell Celtics? I think that there's a modern era, which people normally consider to have started with the drafting of Bird and Magic and the start of their careers in 1979. And then there's a prehistoric NBA, which basically is from, most people consider, from the drafting of Bill Russell through the 70s, you know, pretty much until the ABA collapsed and the NBA got Dr. J. So it's just different because there were only 8 teams in the 60s and no free agency.
Out today to think about it didn't have to be this way. Phil led them down a path right out the back door and into the sunset.
Well, Skip, I think the thing is that you covering sports for 40 years and me playing, the biggest thing that you can have in sports is regret. And I think Michael Jordan has regret now looking back 2 decades that we should have been given the opportunity. Skip, I still believe that he holds Jerry Reinsdorf and Jerry Krause responsible. He does not blame Phil. He says,
of course not. It's against his programming to blame Phil.
Because you guys started this ball rolling down the hill. Because you started this, he can go. Because
you can even see the look on his face. Like there was like an element of cognitive dissonance when the interviewer was letting him know about Phil Jackson and Jerry Reinsdorf and what they discussed. It was like Jordan was trying to figure it out, and he has a tremendous analytical mind, and he normally is a relatively rational-based thinker. But just the thought of Phil Jackson commiserating with Reinsdorf and maybe leaving out certain factoids or components of the storyline, it just didn't register to Jordan, or he would not allow it to register.
As he said it, Skip, he said they said he could go 82-0 and Phil wasn't coming back. He made sure he mentioned that. So at no point in time leading up until the end and winning the top.
Right, that's what Krause said. But that's not what Reinsdorf is alleging. Either way, it doesn't matter because Reinsdorf was not bringing back that whole team.
Title, did you ever try to clarify that we were premature? That's not what he done. And so, Skip, I believe that's one of the reasons Michael Jordan came back, even after 3 years, because that itch, because most athletes would.
That's one of the reasons, but also it was to justify his ownership of a team, and also it was a favor to the commissioner of the NBA to help buy time to give LeBron the opportunity to be ready to enter into the league. That was meant to be an informal passing of the baton from Jordan to LeBron. LeBron enters the league in 2003, right after Jordan has ended his career in 2003. Everything by the numbers. And of course, as we know, they both wear the number 23, 2003.
I tell you, Skip, there's nothing you will be able to do in life that can replace the competition that you had in your said sport. And that's why Mike came back. Deep down in his mind, he believed he could have won a title with Washington, Skip. That's why he came back.
No, he didn't really believe that, brother. I'm sure that had they made the playoffs, he would have put his best foot forward and tried to stay positive and encourage his teammates. But there's no way that he thought that he was going to win a championship on the Wizards. The reason why Shannon is saying that is because the LeBron James fanboys, a.k.a. the Jordan haters, they love to include Jordan's Wizard years because they know that that takes away from Jordan's, his dominance or his aura.
Really believe that he could.
No, I don't think that he really believed that he could, Shannon Sharpe. But that's basically it on that. That's my two-dimensional coverage of the Michael Jordan legendary and classic sports docuseries The Last Dance. So peace.